Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Pennsylvania Earth Sciences Association and PISA Presents with Triceratops, a look into that absolutely just iconic dinosaur. And I mean, really, what kind of introduction can you give something as famous as this? But we're going to look into a little bit of its life and also, too, give a bit of a glance into its absolutely bonkers discovery story. So, without further ado, said bonkers discovery story begins in Colorado in 1887 with one gentleman by the name of George Lyman Cannon finding that fossil right there. Now, that illustration is a little bit misleading, folks. He did not find two separate fossils. What he found was just that skull plate and then the two horns coming out from it. The illustration that's kind of positioned in the middle is actually just an enlargement of the horn to the right. But he found this and is like, you know what? This is unique. This is something really just important. And so he did what a lot of people would have done at the time, which was he contacted Othniel Charles Marsh. Yes, the guy of the Bone Wars fame. And so he let Marsh know about the specimen, sent it over to Marsh, and Marsh started studying it. Now, keep in mind that while some of the subsequent shenanigans may seem a bit bonkers, paleontology was still a very new science. So it's very easy for somebody, even someone like Marsh, to make some mistakes. Now, he did make quite a few, though, you have to admit. First of all, he's looking at the surrounding rocks, which are indeed Cretaceous in age. Decided, nope, you know what, those aren't Cretaceous after all. Nope, just yeah, he yeeted that idea right out the door and just went, these are in fact Pliocene, so much younger. And this particular fossil, this is of an early, guess, a bison. Probably weren't expecting that, were you? Now, so he actually named this specimen Bison alticornis. Now, obviously, the title of this is Triceratops and not Bison alticornis. So, what happened to kind of make things just make more sense? Now, what happened was Wyoming in 1888. Now, this is where things really start to get even more weird. So, now this particular specimen right here was found. Now, so this skull right here was found kind of hidden partially in a cliff in the Lance Formation of Wyoming. And so being partially hidden, people couldn't really see really more so what it looked like, but still a group of, yep, cowboys. A group of cowboys came past and they're looking at this thing, and the one person reported it as being, quote, horrifically large. And I mean, yes, you got to keep in mind, folks, the neck frill of a Triceratops is up to 10 foot wide. So yeah, this thing was probably pretty honking large, even buried in a cliff. So they're looking at this, and people being people and being naturally curious, they're just, you know what? That thing looks really cool. Let's get it down. So they did what really just they happened to just have at their disposal, which was they tried to lasso the thing. Now, problem being that actually broke off the horn, and trying to get it back, it was sort of slipped out, fell down the cliff, and there was a subsequent Keystone Cop style scrambling of a bunch of cowboys trying to figure out, oh crap, we just dropped the fossil down a cliff, what do we do? So someone then comes up with the idea of contacting a local fellow who's basically a fossil hunter that works in conjunction with a lot of noted museums and paleontologists, which is something that's still actually done today. And one of the people that this guy happened to work with was, you guessed it, Othniel Charles Marsh. So he contacted Marsh and he's like, hey, a bunch of cowboys found this fossil out in Wyoming. It looks and sounds a lot like this specimen that you found earlier. Marsh agreed, and not only did he agree, but because of the new features that were found in this skull, he renamed it that name up at the top there, Ceratops horridus. So we're getting closer, right? So as the features on this skull, again this one, started to become more and more just exposed, and this fellow that is doing this excavating was getting really excited, and he's letting Marsh know all these developments. And then finally the one day he's like, oh boy, Yeah, I found something pretty important, namely a third horn. And so because of that, Marsh was really floored, and he's just, okay, this deserves an honor in the name, this deserves some acknowledgement. And so he renamed it to its final and of course most famous name, the one that it has today, which is Triceratops horridus. Now, today, I mean, Triceratops is consistently voted as the second most popular dinosaur of all. Now, really, I mean, you got to admit, though, that number one is T Rex, so that's a pretty darn hard act to follow. But still, all the same, Triceratops is often voted, conversely, the most recognizable. Because, and just to give an example of this, I'll say something that happened to me actually last week. So at work, I'm admiring this, an absolutely adorable little boy is walking past me, and I'm like, oh, I like your pajamas, just being friendly because he had dinosaur pajamas on. And I'm asking him the dinosaurs in his pajamas and pointed to something that looked like a cartoonified version of Tyrannosaurus Rex. The kid didn't say it was a Tyrannosaurus, he said it was a Spinosaurus. Now, you got to keep in mind that because there are so many large theropods, like these giant meat eating dinosaurs, even for a little boy like that, he was probably maybe 4 at the most, it's easy for folks to make a mistake like that. So while Triceratops is definitely as Tyrannosaurus, sorry, is definitely as iconic as it is, there are lots of other theropods that somebody that may not know as much about it can mistake it for. But the combination of those 3 horns and that neck frill make Triceratops often the most instantly recognizable dinosaur, with a close-up at its face being right here and just a more wide-ranging view of the body right there, with of course the life reconstruction itself. Now, altogether, Triceratops' story begins anew in a similar area to where it was found about 66 million years ago. So, how does that iconic facial structure and really its body reflect the adaptations that it's made to its environment? Well, first of all, in terms of it, there were actually 2 different species of Triceratops. So now altogether, you're looking at a dinosaur that's 26 to 30 foot long and 12,000 to 16,000 pounds, which is staggeringly large. So large that actually earlier I was in a room and I'm just, just for crafts and giggles, I actually paced it out, and Triceratops, on average, was bigger than the room that I was in. My room wasn't even 30 by 10 foot. And so just when you have the time, maybe go outside and just measure out 30 by 10. And that gives you an idea of just how absolutely huge it was. Which, one of the things about Triceratops is that it's almost kind of a victim of its own popularity, where people look at it and just its visuals are so iconic, so famous that people are tunnel visioned on that. And they really lose track of just how absolutely, really how crucial of a dinosaur it was to its environment. It was very, very plentiful with many of the environments that it's found in. Triceratops consists of about 46% of the herbivorous fossils that have been found in these environments. In other words, it was very plentiful and an extreme, just a keystone part of its ecosystem. And also, too, just folks kind of lose track of just how massive it was. Now, so what's the difference between these 2 species? I'm not going to pronounce the name of the newer one because for some odd reason it always aggravates my stammer, but the older is horridus. So Triceratops horridus had a short nasal horn and a longer forward-facing brow or orbital horn. That's the one that's above the eyes. Now, whereas the younger one had a shorter snout. Now, altogether, they're both found in the western United States and Canada, and something that's very crucially interesting is that they're found in very similar rocks, just at different stratigraphic levels. So in other words, say that you could look at a giant cliff of rock from the Cretaceous period in various ranges. You would find fossils of horridus towards the bottom, but then a little bit up top, you would find fossils of the newer specimen. So in the same geologic column, you would find two different species of the same dinosaur, and that's something that's almost unheard of anywhere else, which is what's led paleontologists to reason that Horridus actually evolved into the other specimen, which is something really, really interesting. It basically shows its own evolution when they find these fossils together. Now, again, there are two species, and obviously their most famous features are the horns and the frill. So the nasal horn right there, and your brow or orbital horns, which are about 3.3 foot long. And then again, the frill, which is up to 10 foot across. Now, one of the most absolute famous things, a lot of things that people think of, really, ever since there was a famous mural painted by Knight in 1942 that showed Triceratops and Tyrannosaurus battling it out. And yes, they actually did live at the same period during the late Cretaceous, but still, was this famous frill and horn combo of Triceratops, was that really responsible more so for defense? Or really, what was its function altogether? Do we really know that this thing was kind of put on the Triceratops and it evolved simply to deal some serious, just butt kicking damage to a T Rex? Well, we actually don't know. Now, was its function display, which is one of the main two theories and probably actually the most accepted one. Now, these horns did change shape over time. In other words, young Triceratops have slightly different looking horns than the older ones, which has led some paleontologists to reason that as these horns change over time, while yes, as the animal matures, they obviously get older, but still, does this change in the shape and the curve of the horns, does that somehow imply that they are there to, say, attract a mate, or to make it kind of stand out or to look better to other Triceratops? So that's kind of one of the ideas. With the young themselves, in other words, like the baby Triceratops, they have small triangular brow horns and very small triangular epoccipitals, which, how I can pronounce that, and I can't pronounce the other species of Triceratops, don't ask me. It's stuttering can be a weird thing sometimes. Now, epoccipitals are sort of like the little itty bitty horns that are on the back of the frill, just so that you know. Second idea, was this function for defense? Now, yes, people will grant you that a partial horn was found in 1997 that shows Tyrannosaurus bite marks, which there is no mistaking that. I mean, T-Rex had one heck of an iconic jaw, and we know very well what its teeth looked like, so you can't mistake that. But then the thing is that with Triceratops comprising so much of its ecosystem, wouldn't you think that even with how limited the fossil record is overall, with how few fossils that we find of every species back and forth, because fossilization is a very difficult process for a specimen to survive after all, wouldn't you think that we would have found more of that? I mean, there are some Triceratops fossils with T-Rex marks on the ribs too, other things, but still, we actually don't have many specimens altogether with damage like that on them. We have surprisingly very few. And also conversely, there's a lot of debate on interspecies defensive remarks. In other words, say two Triceratops literally butting heads with each other. Just whether or not it be, say, over territory or a mate or food or what have you. I don't know. Whoever gets the remote control. I have no idea. Just whoever's butting heads with the other one. Paleontologists can't agree whether or not the horn and the frills were for defense or for display. Although, more so, like I said, most of them kind of agree that it actually probably was for display, with a secondary function being defense if when things absolutely got down to it. Now, this skull altogether could be up to a third of the Triceratops's length, popularly known as trike from kind of like a throwaway reference in Jurassic Park. It was a line of Ellie Sattlers, I believe, but It's kind of called trike in a lot of the popular literature and other websites online that you may see. Now, altogether, these epoccipitals, you had about 19 to 26 of them on the average fossil. And in terms of the beak, another famous feature of Triceratops, its beak consisted of a rostral bone on the top, followed by several other bones, and the construction of the nasal passages, which were very, very actually significant. And altogether, the beak appears to be adapted for cropping plants. Now, in terms of the teeth, so you're going from in back of the beak into the actual maxilla, into the jaw here. So a triceratops could go through perhaps 800 teeth in a lifetime. It ate things like cycads, ferns, palm leaves. Now you look at these particular fossils, these particular, well, plants rather, and all of them are found on the open plains. So then you can reason that Triceratops lived and just did its thing on these open plains environments. Now, furthermore, just going to the idea that it kind of kept low to the ground in this environment that had these particular kinds of plants, you consider how its head is constructed. Its head is hung, so to speak, at 45 degrees relative to its body in many, if not most, of the specimens that we have. And while, yes, fossilization, obviously the muscles and the tissue are no longer there and things relax and change, but still, you can get a general idea of how things are carried. And the head is at about 45 degrees, which makes Triceratops not really low slung, but still kind of low to the ground. And also, too, its ears, from studying the bones in the ears, they have features that appear to show that they were specially attuned to low frequency sounds. So if you can picture an animal that's this large, going on eating along on the ground, and say that its head is further down, its head with its most, shall I say, defensive features, and something's coming up in back of it, if it had ears that could hear things better, hear these low frequency sounds like these steps coming up in back of them, it would be more easily able to just wheel around and figure out, hey, who's sneaking up in back of me? So now these skulls show the presence of keratin, which indicates a very bright color. And as in much pain as I am looking at that image with all those different species from different time periods and places next to each other, point being, my Lisa Frank Trapper Keeper with that neon Triceratops from 1988 may not have been as far off as what I thought it was at the time. Just saying. Now, Triceratops is actually cold-blooded. Yes, many dinosaurs were warm-blooded, but you have to keep in mind that there are two lineages of dinosaurs, lizard-hipped and bird-hipped. The ones that generally just, well, that wound up giving rise to the lineage of birds, they are not Triceratops. So, because it was of a different lineage, it just for whatever reason, it did not evolve into that way, and they actually stayed as cold-blooded reptiles. Now, another thing that they stayed as in terms of their movement, they moved with their elbows behind and out. We know this from trackways. Its specific track is on the far right in the middle. So now, if you think of fresh mud, I mean, we've all stepped in mud. Now, when you step in mud, say straight down, you just go boom and just stick your hand in directly from up top. That track looks a lot different than how it does if you come in at an angle. And so, from analyzing tracks, paleontologists have been able to figure out how Triceratops carried itself and even how it walked. Now, one thing that people still debate about, well, another thing that people still debate about is herds. Now, one of the things you'll see a lot in the literature is this infamous ossified break in the tail of a particular specimen of Triceratops. That, so the people that wrote the paper say, implies that the animal traveled in herds because, as the story goes, the original Triceratops was walking along and then like, dude, Bob, you just stepped on my tail. What gives? It's like, oh, sorry, Dick. I was talking to Harry. I couldn't, I couldn't see you. And then this break wound up healing up, and the dinosaur just kind of went along and did the rest of its life. Problem being, And something that I actually agree with is just going back to the sheer size of these animals. For two Triceratops to come up next to each other, for one just to step on the other one's tail, quote unquote, accidentally to cause a break of that severity, that was something a lot more than just an accidental, oops, sorry, my bad. There was something else going on there. Now, another thing that's against the idea of herds is that even considering its staggering prevalence in the fossil record, again, you're looking at about 46 upwards percent of dinosaur fossils in a particular site being Triceratops. It's rarely found in groups of three or more. So, once more, I mean, if it traveled in herds, you would think that you would see more of these fossils together. Now, another thing that they debate about is its phylogeny. Not really necessarily where it is placed in terms of the phylogeny, but how it relates with a specimen called Torosaurus. So, Triceratops was once considered a short frilled ceratopsid, but then they're looking at things and then they're like, you know what? It's actually a much more longer frilled ceratopsid. It's much more of a longer frill to it, a bigger frill. And obviously, with one that's the size of what it is, I completely agree with that idea. However, that reclassified Triceratops is a member of the subfamily Chasmosaurinae. Now, the idea is that Torosaurus, which is the dinosaur on the right, so a 2010 study claimed that Torosaurus is really just a mature Triceratops. Now, in favor of that is that about half of trikes have thin spots in the frill that are close to where Torosaurus has its openings. But the idea is still very debated because, after all, having thin spots does not necessarily mean that they wind up getting open spots. And also, too, there are a couple of things, anatomically speaking, with the dinosaurs that are a bit different, really. And so, personally, I think that Torosaurus is its own specimen, but the debate still carries on. Now, one thing that doesn't carry on or change is the overwhelming just popularity of Triceratops itself. It is the official state fossil of several states, South Dakota and Wyoming right there, and remains just an absolute icon in people's imagination and popular culture throughout time, and for good reason, and may that always continue. So, thank you very much, folks. Thank you for joining us, and have a wonderful